This is a story about love, but not the kind you see in movies. Stay tuned, this one feels a little too real. The ring was simple, but it carried years of promises. June stared at it every morning, twisting it gently as if reminding herself that love, once chosen, didn't disappear overnight. She and Min-jae had planned everything together, the small venue, the quiet music, the life after. Nothing extravagant. Just theirs. When he spoke about the future, his voice still sounded steady. Familiar. Safe. June trusted that sound more than words. She trusted history. What she didn't notice were the pauses, the slight hesitations before reassurance, the way his phone always faced down. Love had trained her to believe consistency meant honesty. She didn't know yet that promises don't always break loudly. Sometimes they fade quietly, while you're still holding them close. Sumin had always been there. Bridesmaid. Confidant. The one who knew every detail before anyone else. She helped June choose fabrics, colors, even flowers. She listened carefully, smiled often, asked the right questions. June never questioned her presence. Trust felt natural with someone who had shared tears, laughter, and secrets for years. Sumin knew how nervous June was about the wedding, how deeply she wanted it to feel right. What June didn't see was how Sumin watched Min-jae when June wasn't looking. Not with desire, but with calculation. The kind that waits patiently. Friendship, June believed, was protection. She didn't know it could also be proximity, the closest distance betrayal ever needs. Wedding preparations moved forward, but June felt oddly alone inside them. Min-jae became distant, distracted by work, by stress, by reasons that sounded reasonable enough to accept. She blamed herself for feeling uneasy. After all, love required patience. Sumin reassured her constantly, offering calm words when June's doubts surfaced. It's just pressure, she'd say. Everything changes before weddings. June wanted to believe that. She wanted normal explanations to fix unfamiliar feelings. Yet every postponed meeting, every unanswered call, left a small mark. Love didn't feel broken. It felt delayed. And sometimes delay is more dangerous than refusal, because it keeps hope alive just long enough to deepen the fall. The dress fit perfectly. The mirror reflected a version of June she had imagined for years, calm, hopeful, ready. Sumin stood behind her, adjusting the fabric carefully, her hands steady. You look beautiful, Sumin said softly. June smiled, but something in the reflection felt distant. The woman in the mirror looked prepared, but not certain. As the seamstress pinned the final adjustments, June imagined walking down the aisle. She imagined Min-jae waiting. But the image flickered, unstable, like a memory trying to form before it existed. Beauty couldn't anchor uncertainty. The dress could be perfect and still belong to the wrong future. That night, June noticed Sumin's phone light up repeatedly. Messages silenced quickly. When June asked casually, Sumin brushed it off with a smile. Nothing about it was obvious. Nothing demanded confrontation. But omission has weight. It settles quietly in the chest, asking questions you don't want to hear. June lay awake later, thinking about how trust works, how it depends on what's shared, and what's deliberately withheld. The wedding date was close. So close that fear felt inconvenient. June chose sleep over suspicion. She didn't know that the silence forming around her wasn't accidental. It was preparation. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, hiding in small moments June tried not to question. At work, she noticed Min-jae standing closer to Sumin than before, their laughter softer, more contained. He no longer searched for June in crowded rooms. When coworkers asked about the wedding, June answered automatically, smiling out of habit. Inside, something felt misaligned. The future she was preparing for seemed to be moving without her permission. She watched Sumin place a hand briefly on Min-jae's arm, a gesture so quick it could be denied. June told herself she was imagining things. Trust had always meant choosing belief over doubt. Still, A quiet awareness settled in her chest, the sense that the space she once occupied was slowly being filled by someone who knew exactly where to stand. That night, Ji-yoon drove alone through the city, wedding details echoing in her mind. The venue called again, asking for confirmation. Deadlines didn't wait for uncertainty. She called Min-jae. The line rang, then fell silent. No explanation. No apology. Just absence. At a stoplight, her phone buzzed with a message from Sumin, reassuring her that stress changed people before weddings. Ji-yoon read the words slowly. They sounded reasonable, practiced even. Yet reassurance from the wrong person felt heavier than silence. The city lights blurred as she drove on, realizing that she had started receiving answers from someone who was never meant to give them. Hope lingered, but it was thinner now, stretched carefully across a growing gap she didn't yet know how to cross. Ji-yoon arrived at Sumin's apartment unannounced, carrying a garment bag meant for final dress alterations. The door opened only partway. Sumin stood there, blocking the view inside. Ji-yoon didn't need to step forward. She saw the unfamiliar, and yet familiar, shoes near the door. Recognition hit before denial could soften it. No explanation followed. None was necessary. Silence spoke clearly when words failed. Ji-yoon handed Sumin the garment bag and stepped back, nodding as if accepting something she had already suspected. As she walked away, she realized betrayal didn't always require confession. Sometimes, it revealed itself simply by standing in the wrong doorway at the wrong time. They met days later in a quiet restaurant. The food arrived untouched. Min-jae spoke carefully as if rehearsed. He said things had changed. He said it wasn't planned. Ji-yoon listened without interrupting. She watched his face for remorse, for hesitation. What she found instead was relief. The kind that comes when a difficult decision no longer needs defending. When she asked about the wedding, he didn't answer. Silence replaced promises. In that silence, Ji-yoon understood everything she needed to know. Love hadn't ended in anger. It had ended in convenience. That night, Ji-yoon sat alone on the edge of the bed, the engagement ring resting in her palm. She studied it one last time before placing it gently on the table. She opened her calendar and stared at the circled date she had planned her future around. Slowly, deliberately, she drew a single line through it. There were no tears, just clarity. The kind that arrives after denial has exhausted itself. Ji-yoon lay back and stared at the ceiling, realizing that the wedding hadn't been stolen yet, but it was already no longer hers. And once something no longer belongs to you, holding on only delays the truth. The morning arrived without ceremony. Ji-yoon woke before her alarm, her room quiet, her phone untouched. This was supposed to be the day everything aligned, the day her life officially began again. Instead, the hours felt borrowed, like time she was no longer meant to live inside. She showered slowly, dressed plainly, and avoided mirrors. Somewhere else, makeup brushes moved, dresses were zipped, flowers were arranged. Somewhere else, her wedding was preparing itself without her. Ji-yoon sat at the edge of the bed, hands folded, breathing carefully. She didn't cry. She felt strangely calm, as if her heart had already accepted what her mind was still processing. The day hadn't been taken from her loudly. It had simply moved forward without her consent. Ji-yoon stood across the street from the wedding hall, watching guests arrive in careful outfits and polite smiles. Laughter floated through the open doors, light and unaware. She recognized faces, people who had once congratulated her, planned with her, asked questions she no longer had answers for. She stayed where she was, invisible among passers-by. This was the life she had imagined walking into proudly. Now she observed it like a stranger. The doors opened wider. Music drifted out. Ji-yoon felt her chest tighten, not from jealousy, but from disbelief. How easily the world adjusted. How effortlessly a place meant for her made room for someone else. She crossed the street slowly, each step deliberate, as if approaching closure instead of confrontation. Inside the hall, Jiun stopped at the back. The music softened as Sumin appeared at the entrance, wrapped in white. Jiun recognized the dress instantly. She had chosen it. She had imagined herself in it. Applause rose gently, filling the space. Jiun's breath caught, not from shock, but from clarity. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was confirmation. Min-jae stood at the altar, composed, waiting. When his eyes met Jiun's across the room, something flickered, not regret, but discomfort. He looked away. That was the moment Jiun understood the truth fully. The wedding hadn't been stolen at the last minute. It had been reassigned long before today. Vows were exchanged calmly, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The words sounded familiar, rehearsed, promises Jiun had once believed were meant for her. The room filled with applause. Guests smiled. Phones lifted to capture the moment. Joy uninterrupted. Jiun stood still, absorbing the sound. This was the hardest part, not the betrayal, but the normalcy. The ease with which her absence went unquestioned. She realized then that closure wouldn't come from exposure or confrontation. It would come from leaving without explanation. Before the applause faded, Jiun turned away quietly, choosing to exit the moment that no longer belonged to her. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, honest. Jiun walked away from the hall without looking back. Each step carried weight, but also release. She didn't feel defeated. She felt emptied, and in that emptiness, there was space. Space to rebuild something untouched. Behind her, doors closed, sealing a chapter she no longer needed to finish reading. Ahead, the city moved on, unaware of what had just ended. Jiun blended into the crowd, no longer a bride, no longer chosen, but no longer trapped. The wedding that should have been hers ended that day. So did the version of her who believed love was owed. The days after the wedding passed without ceremony. Jiun returned to her routines carefully, as if moving through a life that no longer fit but still functioned. People avoided asking questions. Silence became its own form of respect. She packed away reminders slowly, not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it. Each folded dress, each unopened envelope marked the end of a version of her that had loved without reservation. Loss didn't arrive loudly anymore. It settled softly, like dust after a storm. And for the first time, Jiun realized that survival didn't require strength. It required presence. Jiun moved apartments without announcement. A smaller place, quieter, chosen only by her. No shared opinions. No compromises disguised as love. She rearranged furniture late at night, learning the comfort of decisions that belonged solely to her. The silence felt different here, not empty, but open. She noticed how peace arrived when no one was watching. How identity returned in private moments. This space didn't replace what was lost. It clarified what had been missing all along. One evening, Jiun wrote a letter she never planned to send. Not to confront, not to explain, but to release. She wrote about the future she had imagined. About how betrayal didn't destroy her, it redirected her. When she finished, she folded the paper neatly and placed it in a drawer. Closure didn't need witnesses. Some truths exist only to be acknowledged, not shared. Months later, Jiun stood before a mirror and didn't look away. She saw someone changed, but intact. She returned to spaces she had avoided: cafes, gatherings, conversations. Her presence felt earned now. When people asked about her past, she answered briefly. She no longer carried explanations like burdens. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was consistent. And in that consistency, Jiun found something stronger than hope: ownership. On a quiet morning, Jiun walked through the city without destination. No plans waiting. No promises demanding fulfillment. She realized then that what had been taken never defined her future. It only cleared the path. The wedding that should have been hers became the moment she chose herself instead. And that choice, made in silence, without applause, was the beginning of a life that could no longer be stolen.